Bastogne held. But for several days in December 1944, nobody inside that perimeter could treat that outcome as guaranteed. A surrounded road hub, shortages getting sharper, weather closing the sky, relief still somewhere beyond the trees. Most people know the headline, Bastogne did not fall. But in the critical days of late December, this looked less like destiny and more like a race between pressure and time. Inside were American forces, including the 101st Airborne and attached units. They faced artillery, armor, bitter cold, and mounting strain on supplies and medical care. Outside, German forces were trying to contain and reduce a town that mattered for one simple reason: roads. Bastogne was a road center, and in the Ardennes, winter movement was already forced onto limited routes. So this was not just a fight for one Belgian town. If Bastogne stayed in Allied hands, German movement became slower, riskier, and more congested. If it fell, the offensive had one less obstacle at a critical junction. So the battle was really about tempo. Could the defenders hold long enough to disrupt a much larger attack? By December 21st, Bastogne was effectively encircled. That changed the meaning of every hour. The defenders were in. Relief was out. And the weather made the isolation worse. Snow, cloud, and poor visibility sharply limited Allied aircraft just when aircraft were badly needed for support and supply. That is where the danger sharpens. The men inside Bastogne were not just fighting the enemy around them. They were fighting a calendar that was getting less forgiving. Now, a factual caution matters. It is tempting to turn this into a dramatic countdown to certain collapse. The evidence supports something more careful. Conditions inside the perimeter were hard and getting harder. Ammunition was a serious concern. Medical shortages were real. Wounded men strained the care available. None of that proves an exact hour when the defense would have failed. But it does show a position operating on a narrowing margin. Then came the moment most people remember: the German demand for surrender and the famous American refusal. Memorable, yes. But defiance did not fill shell stocks, move ambulances, or open roads. That is the real turn in the story. Bastogne was not preserved by one line, one personality, or one miracle. It held because several unstable factors began to shift just enough. First, the Germans had limits of their own. They were attacking in winter over crowded roads with their own logistical strain, losses, and operational friction. Bastogne mattered to them, but so did the larger offensive. Keeping pressure on the town was only one demand among many. A siege is never only about the weakness of the force trapped inside. It is also about what the force outside can still organize, supply, and finish. Then the sky changed. For days, bad weather had helped shield the German advance from full Allied air interference while also isolating Bastogne from Allied aircraft. When the weather improved, the rhythm of the battle changed with it. Aircraft could reach the area again. They could strike German positions. Just as important, they could drop supplies into Bastogne. Those drops were not perfect. Deliveries could be scattered. Conditions were still difficult. Enemy fire remained a threat. But the airdrops mattered because they eased the shortage tightening around the defenders. Not permanently, not completely, but enough to buy time. And time was the real currency of Bastogne. Now connect that to the final piece: ground relief. Patton's Third Army had turned north in one of the best-known operational moves of the war. But famous is not the same as effortless. Moving armored forces through winter conditions against resistance was slow, dangerous work. The question was not just whether relief was coming, it was whether it could arrive before the crisis inside Bastogne became much worse. That is why December 26th matters. On that day, elements of the 4th Armored Division reached Bastogne and opened a corridor. This was not a clean cinematic rescue. The fighting did not simply stop. The link itself was strained. But it was a link, and that changed the meaning of the battle. Bastogne was no longer a sealed pocket, waiting on weather and dwindling stocks alone. The worst uncertainty had been broken. So what actually saved Bastogne? Not one factor, A road hub defense held under severe pressure long enough for several conditions to tilt, just enough, in the defender's favor. German operational limits, improving weather, air resupply, and ground relief. Take one of those away too early, and the story could have looked very different. That is why Bastogne still matters. Not because it single-handedly decided the entire Battle of the Bulge, and not because history turned on one perfect quote. It matters because it shows how a famous outcome can depend on ordinary, unforgiving variables. Roads, clouds, supply crates, hours. That is the uncomfortable truth beneath the legend. Bastogne held. But it held on a margin.